I think we can start. Hello everyone, my name is Moshe Shemtel. I'm the new organizer coordinator of the TA, whatever, of the seminar. Any of you who is interested in taking this seminar for credits, please stay after the talk and we will discuss all the technical details. And for the rest, everyone actually enjoy the talk. So I'm happy to present Tal Lancewicki. Did I get it almost right?
Almost right.
As good as I managed to do. He's a PhD student at the Department of Computer Science at Aviv University and advised by Professor Tal Lancewicki. He's currently also an applied scientist intern in Amazon. Before that, he obtained his Bachelor in Science in Mathematics and Economics from EBU, our own beloved university. His research focus is on sequential decision making, in particular reinforcement learning in multi-armed bandits, which we'll at least to some extent hear about today. So, Tal, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the introduction. All right, so this talk is based on basically 3 papers. So this is a joint work with Aviv Rosenberg, Shai Mansour, Ting Jing, and Klein Blau. So basically the framework we're dealing with is regret minimization in episodic, finite horizon MDPs. I will explain everything, all the notations and the model. And so today we'll deal with this paper will deal with 2 new aspects in MDPs. So one is delayed feedback. So we assume that the agent doesn't observe the feedback immediately, but with some latency. And another aspect is cooperation in MDPs. So imagine that you have multiple agents that interact with the same MDP and share information in order to learn faster. And we'll see how it helps us to learn faster, or how to utilize the fact that they share information. Right, and the 2 are somewhat, or sometimes related. For example, if we consider the cooperation model that the agent communicate with each other, so they often have delays in the communication. So I receive some feedback from other agents, but it comes to me in some delay. So at least in multi-armed bandit, for example, there are models that combine the two models of cooperation and delay. But here we deal with each of them separately, at least for now. All right, so again, based on 3 papers. So these 2 are from deal with delayed feedback, and this one from ICML is on cooperation. Okay, so here's the plan of the talk today. So I'll give some background of methods in multi-armed bandit. Some of you might be familiar with this, but a lot of the methods we use in multi-armed bandit, or a lot of the methods we use in MDPs, are inspired by methods in multi-armed bandit. So I thought it would be a good idea to give some background on that. Then most of the talk will be on the delayed feedback in MDPs, and depending on the time, we'll talk about the cooperation in MDPs. All right, so we'll start with the background on multi-armed bandit. So here is the basic model of multi-armed bandit. So the background story is that we go to a casino. We have multiple slot machines, and each of them has an underlying distribution, and with distribution of reward or cost. Usually the second story is with reward, but in this talk we'll talk about cost. Right, so each time we pull a machine, we lose something or get some reward. Right? And the goal is to maximize our reward. And one thing that this model captures is the trade-off between exploration and exploitation. So on one hand, we want to learn the distribution behind the machines. On the other hand, we want to exploit the best machine that we think. Right? So usually in online learning, the performance is measured by the regret, which is, when we talk about cost, is the difference between the total cost of our algorithm and the cost of the best machine in hindsight. Okay? Any questions so far? All right. Yeah, so basically the literature differentiates between two types of cost types. So the basic model is stochastic multi-bandit, where we assume that the costs are stochastic and IID over time. All right, so the methods or one principle that we use in stochastic multi-bandit, or it extends to other regimes in online learning, is optimism under uncertainty. And in the context of multi-bandit, what it says, or so before that, let me give some annotation. So NTA would be the number of pools of arm A up to time t, and mu hat would be the empirical mean. Okay. Now, right. So here's the algorithm. Here's an algorithm for stochastic multi-bandit. It's called UCB, upper confidence bound. But when we talk about cost, it will be LCB. So in each time step, we compute a lower confidence bound of the empirical mean. Okay, so this will be the LCB. So we take the empirical mean, reduce something which scales as approximately 1 over the square root of the number of samples we have. Right? So this basically guarantees that this lower confidence bound is actually below the actual mean with high probability at least. Okay? And in each time step, we choose the arm with the smallest lower confidence bound. Right? So in some sense, we're optimistic about the loss of each arm. Okay, and pull the best arm. Yeah, so we have an optimistic estimate for each arm, and we pull the best arm based on these optimistic estimates. All right. So basically the idea, so here we have, for example, 3 arms. So mu A2 would be the best arm because it has the lowest mean cost. Okay, but we don't know the mu's exactly. We can compute these lower confidence bound, and this would be the lower confidence bound, the lowest lower confidence bound. Okay, so we choose A1 in that case, and the idea is whenever we pull an arm which is suboptimal, okay, so basically the difference between UA1 and UA2 could be at most the difference between UA1 and its LCB and its lower confidence bound. Right? So now every time I pull the A1, for example, so the difference between these two shrink. Right? So every time I make a mistake, I have sorry. Yeah. Let me see here. Okay. Yeah. So every time I make a mistake, this confidence bound shrinks, and so we can sum this the sum of regrets. So every time I make a mistake, I pretty much lose this thing, which shrink over time. And if we sum over the time steps and the arms, we can show that the regret scales is something like square root of 80. Okay?
What is NT? NT. NTA.
NTA is the number of times we pull arm A up to time T.
Ah, okay.
So A is the number of actions, T is the number of time steps. Okay? And this is, like in worst cases, this is optimal. So this is regret arm. Alright, so the stochastic IID loss assumption is somewhat unrealistic in many cases, because like in the real world we have a drift in the distribution, and sometimes we have correlation between time steps, and we want to generalize to something to more general distributions over the arms. So in order to generalize to any kind of distribution, what we assume is that the costs are chosen by an adversary. Right? So this model would be an adversarial multi-arm bandit. In each time step, I have an adversary that chooses the loss. I choose the action, and I get the feedback. Okay? No assumption on distribution whatsoever. All right, and the idea in this model is to utilize some tools from online context optimization. Right? So here I like two general framework in online context optimization. One is online mirror descent. The other is follow the regularized leader. So these two are much, well, they are quite similar. In some cases are equivalent. So let's take, for example, the OMD. So we basically want to minimize the last loss. So this would be some estimator of the loss because we don't have we don't observe the cost function. Okay, so we want to minimize the last loss, but we don't want to do the steps too fast. So we have some regularization term that keeps us close to the last iterator, right? So QT would be a distribution over the arms. Okay, so I update this distribution in such manner. So if we take, for example, R to be the L2 regularization, so this would be exactly gradient step, like gradient descent, right? But in multi-arm bandit, we use negative entropy, right? And negative entropy, if we use either OMD or FTRL with negative entropy on the simplex, so the update is quite nice. So it's just a multiplicative weight update, right? So we take the last iterate, we multiply it by this exponential weight of the loss estimator. Okay? Yeah, so
just to make sure, the difference in notation of the regularization term from B out to L, it's just notation, or
no,
is
so
R
would be the entropy. B out would be the Bergman divergence with respect to R. In case of entropy, it's the KL divergence. Okay. Yeah. So here is like the first algorithm that deals with adversarial multi-arm bandit. So it basically takes this multiplicative weight update and use an importance sampling estimator. Right. So the importance sampling estimator for RA would be the indicator that we chose that arm, that we chose that arm in round A, times the loss of arm A. And note that whenever the indicator is 1, then we observe this loss, right? So it's well defined, divided by the probability to choose that arm. Right? Now note that if I take the expectation over this estimator, right? So the expectation of the indicator is exactly the probability at the denominator. So these two cancel out, and I remain only with the loss. Right? So this is an unbiased estimator. Right? Its expectation is exactly the loss. Right. And now using general regret bounds of FTRL or OMD, we can show that the regret with respect to the loss estimator is bounded in this way. So this term is often called the penalty, and this one is called the stability. So the stronger the regularization is, usually the penalty increases and the stability decreases, so the algorithm would be more stable. Yeah, and if we choose negative entropy, so this would be the bound with an A here and this QT that helps us later. Okay. All right. So this is the regret with respect to the loss estimator. If I take the expectation on the left-hand side, this would be exactly the regret. Now, how I deal with the right-hand side? So here I have this Q at the denominator, the denominator, which could be quite small, right? But I can cancel one of these q with this q on the outside, all right? So I remain and bound the loss by 1. Okay, I have bounded losses, right? So I basically remain here only with the loss estimator, not squared. Right? So I cancel this 1q with the q on the denominator, and I remain only with the loss, simply the loss estimator. And now if I take the expectation on the right hand side, so this would be bounded by AT. Okay? So if I set the learning grade properly, again I can show that even for adversarial losses, I have regret that scaled as square root of 8. Okay? Any questions so far? Alright. So this was the background on multi-arm bandit, and now we'll talk about MDPs and specific on delayed feedback in MDPs. So adversarial MDP, in adversarial MDP we have a learner that interacts with some environment. Unlike multi-arm bandit, we have now state transition, so the actions affects the state of the agent. And again, the cost can change arbitrarily or chosen by an adversary. So this is quite general and fundamental framework for sequential decision making. And it has many applications, for example, for recommendation systems, robotics, virtual assistant systems, such as Siri or Google Assist, and stuff like that. But if you think about it, in almost every practical application, the feedback is observed in delay.
So when you talk about adversarial MDPs, you mean that the reward function changes adversarially?
Yeah.
The transition carrying on
The transition is stochastic. State stochastic and stationary. Yeah. So basically, we can't handle adversarial transition in MDPs. Yeah, so if you take, for example, a recommendation system, so we have a user that arrived, we recommend him on a product or something like that, but it takes time for the user to give feedback back. Right? And meanwhile, other users arrive, and we need to give them recommendations based only on the information we have so far. So since this is such a fundamental issue in sequential decision making, delays were extensively studied in multi-arm bandit. This is only a partial list of some of the works in adversarial multi-arm bandit with delays. And basically the regret in the multi-arm bandit with delays looks like the optimal regret for the non-delayed case. Okay, so this would be with bandit feedback, this would be with full information, but I don't have here the dependency in the number of actions, plus the square root of the sum of delays. Okay? And we'll see that this is roughly the case also for MDPs. Okay. Now,
So G is the delay.
D is the total delay, like the sum of delays over the T rounds. All right. Now, in RL, we have dynamics, that is state transitions, and the literature differentiates between two types of delays. So in the first model, we have an agent that interacts with the environment, but it observes its own state in delay. Right? So she doesn't know in which state she is. Right? So this is very much related to partially observable MDP, if some of you are familiar. And it turns out that even planning, even if I know the transition function, even planning is computationally hard in this model. On the other hand, what we consider is a model that the agent is aware to its own state, but the algorithm observes the feedback in some delay. Right? So this is very much relevant to any case that we have a remote agent that interacts with the environment and it's aware to its own state, but the data that sends to the algorithm comes in with some latency, right? Or simply, in any case, that only the cost feedback is delayed and not the trajectory feedback, okay, the state feedback.
And observing the regret, the reward.
The reward is always delayed. If the agent, so it doesn't really matter if you observe it right away or, yeah, I can assume that the agent observed the reward in that's the order cost. Okay, and in this model we can actually show some efficient algorithm with sublinear regression. Alright, so here's the formal problem setup. So we run for t episodes. At the beginning of each episode, we choose a policy, pi t. The adversary chooses a cost function and delay. Then the policy is executed on the MDP. So in each time step within the episode, so we have h time steps in each episode. We sample an action from our policy that depends on the state and transition to some new state. Right? So this happens for h time steps. Now the feedback from episode t is not observed at the end of the episode, like in standard adversarial MDP model. It observed only after episode t plus dt. Okay? So at the end of episode t, we observe the cost over the trajectories from round j such that j plus dj equal t. Okay? Now, so this is very much like bandit feedback because I observe only the cost over the trajectory I visit, right? I don't see the cost over states that I didn't visit. Right? So yeah, so this would be called bandit feedback. If I see the whole cost function, this would be full information. Yeah, any question about the model?
Why does the adversary choose the delay?
So it's more general than anything. All right. So you can think of the delay as something stochastic, but again, you want something that is not IID or not with a correlation between time steps. So I consider that the adversary chooses the delay. So this generalizes to any distribution over the days. Yeah, but there's also a model of stochastic MDPs with delays. So here, in this model, these be stochastic IID, and these would also be stochastic IID. We have different results for that. Okay. So the performance, as in multi-arm bandit, would be measured by the regret. So V here is the reward. The cost of playing Vt pi t would be the cost of playing pi t at episode t. Okay, so the expected cost of playing this policy. So we look at the expected cost of the total expected cost of our algorithm that chooses pi t's compared to the best policy in hindsight. Okay. All right. So here's a summary of the regret bounds that we show.
So when you say best policy in hindsight, you mean that you only consider stationary policies?
Yeah, stationary policies, but
because if it was general policies, then you could choose an uphill policy for each episode. It sounds like it would be too strong, right?
So it's one policy for all the episodes.
Yeah, but it's stationary. So
It's stationary, but the station. I mean, if I choose, you mean that I don't want to consider something that is history dependent or something. But it is stationary. Yeah. So this is a summary of our regret bounds. So in the first work, we consider a policy optimization algorithm. I'll not say exactly what it is, but basically it runs some kind of a multi-arm bandit in each state separately. So this is it's a very efficient algorithm, and like variants of it are widely used in practice. And it extends naturally to function approximation. So it has many merits. And under full information, we were able to show that it has the optimal regret. But under bandit feedback, if you have bandit feedback, so as you can see, there's a big gap between the lower bound and the regret bound that we showed for this algorithm. So here we have t to the 2/3 and d to the 2/3, where the lower bound suggests that the regret would be square root of t, square root of d, much like in the multi-arm bandit case. So then we ask ourselves, okay, what can we do? Can we achieve the optimal regret? And the first solution is an inefficient algorithm. So this was more of a warm-up to the second paper in delay. So here we achieve at least regret that scales with square root of t and square root of d, right? And particularly it generalizes the regret bound for multi-arm bandit. So multi-arm bandit would be the case that S and H are simply 1. So this would be exactly the regret, the optimal regret for multi-arm bandit with delays. And yeah, so the question is can we do that efficiently? And the answer is yes. So we present two algorithms for that. So the first one is relatively standard. So basically it runs FDRL on the set of occupancy measure, and I'll define later what is an occupancy measure. So it's a relatively standard algorithm, but the analysis for the delayed feedback is not trivial here. So here again, so we have a slightly worse bound compared to this inefficient algorithm, but this is now an efficient algorithm. One drawback that it has is that the regret is only an expectation and not with high probability. Okay, so we differentiate between expected regret and regret bound with high probability, right? So, which is more desirable. All right. So in our final solution, we take a similar algorithm, but we tweak the estimator a bit. So we don't use exactly this important sampling estimator that I showed you before. And this allows us to show this following regret bound, which is main gap is this HSA to the power of 4. So this is a relatively small gap. So this is the suboptimality gap compared to the lower bound, at least in the delay term. Here we have also a square root of HS gap in the first term, but this gap appears also in the state-of-the-art algorithm for the non-delayed case. Okay. So this is again, it's a nearly optimal, it's an efficient algorithm, and we can also show regret bound with high probability. Right? And this new estimator, in fact, also simplifies the analysis dramatically. So in this talk, we'll focus on this last algorithm. Okay. How do I go on? All right. So yeah. So here is a little bit more background on how to utilize online cortex optimization for learning MDPs. So we do that through the concept of occupancy measures. So an occupancy measure would be the probability, the occupancy measure of high would be the probability to visit SA given the policy pi. Okay? So now we can show.
You have to make sure visit SA means perform action A once you are in state S, or
to visit S and take action.
And then take action A.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. So we can show that we have a bijection between occupancy measures and policies. Right? That is, if we know the occupancy measure of a policy, then we can reconstruct the policy, and if we have the policy, we can compute its occupancy measure. And the nice thing about occupancy measures is that now the loss, like the expected loss of in the episode is now linear with respect to the occupancy measure. Right? So this is very nice. And moreover, the set of occupancy measure is a convex set. Okay? So we can utilize some tools from online convex optimization, FTRL, or OMDs.
In this framework, is it possible to visit the same state twice, or you assume every time
So
state?
yeah, so I've used the notation a bit, but basically I want an occupancy measure that is horizon dependent. right? So I don't visit the same state twice in the same horizon. Okay, so yeah, so I also consider in which horizon it happens. But here, just for the simplicity of the implementation, I ignore that. All right, so like in order to use this linear loss and utilize the online context optimization framework, I need to know what is the set of occupancy measures, and for that I need to know the dynamics. Okay, like the state transition. But if I don't know the dynamics, so Rosenberg and Mansour show that I can use some confidence bound on the set of occupancy measures. Right? So I have an estimate of the set of occupancy measure which contain the true set of occupancy measure with high probability, and this would shrink over time around the true set of occupancy measures. Right? So and then it gives us some additional regret due to the approximation error. All right. And now if we want to handle bandit feedback, so this was introduced by Eugene et al. So they simply use some kind of an important sampling estimator. So again, we have the indicator to visit S and A, visit S and take action A, times the cost, divided by the probability to visit S. Okay? And again, here we have some additional regret due to the variance of the estimator. Yeah, any questions so far? Okay. So with delayed feedback now, we can utilize this online mirror descent framework. What we do is run online mirror descent on this loss estimator with respect to the feedback that arrives in each time. Right? So this would be the total feedback that I get at time t. Right? And then I do the same updates that we showed for multi-arm bandit. The difference here is that Q should be in the set of occupancy measure and not on the simplex, right? Like in multi-arm bandit. Okay. Now for simplicity, let us assume, at least for first, fixed delay and node transition. And in this case,
So Q is not a reward function, it's an occupancy measure?
Q is an occupancy measure.
Okay, but an occupancy measure for which policy?
Okay, so would be the occupancy measure of the policy that I would play at time t+1. I added the occupancy measure, and from that I can deduce what is the policy that corresponds
So
to this.
QT+1 is an estimated occupancy measure for the policy instead that's at t+1. QT is an estimated occupancy measure for a different policy?
So this would be the occupancy measure of the policy that I played at time t.
Okay. It's a little weird. It's a little unintuitive.
So the thing is that I have a bijection between policies and occupancy measure. Instead of updating the policy itself, I update the occupancy measure and deduce the policy. Okay. Because this is here again, I can utilize some tools. Okay. Yeah, so again, for simplicity, let's assume fixed delay and known transition. So now the policy that I play at time t+d. Okay, so at time t+d, I saw the feedback from rounds 1 until t-1, right? So this policy would be the same as this policy that I would play in the non-delayed case at round t, right? Because if I'm in the standard model, the non-delayed model, at time t, I have the feedback from rounds 1 to t-1. So this would be the same as the policy from pi t+d. All right? So I can compute, I can bound the regret of playing the policy of time t+d with respect to the loss estimator at time t. Right? In the same way that I did it for multi-arm bandit. Okay? Now the main challenge is usually to bound this term, the stability term. All right, so just a minute. Yeah, so the left-hand side is not really the regret, right? Because this is playing t plus d at time t. So I want the actual regret. I want qt to appear here. So I have an additional term which consider this difference between the plane qt plus d and plane qt. Okay, so this would be the drift term, and this will cause the delayed term derivative. All right, and again, the main challenge for us at least was the stability term. All right, now if C hat, if the estimator is unbiased, then much like in the multi-arm bandit case, the left-hand side is exactly the expected result. Yeah, and as I said, the main challenge is the stability term. All right, now let's see what's. I'm sorry, typos here. All right. So let's see how the literature handle this stability term in multi-arm bandit. So basically, as before, I can, so in multi-arm bandit we don't have these states. So imagine that we don't have S at all. All right. So just distribution of over the actions. So basically, we can again we have this occupancy measure on SA times the loss estimator, which have the loss estimator have this QT. Okay. So I have like a mismatch between these two, and this happened due to the delay. Right?
What is the K indicator running over? Is that?
Oh, so it's a typo. It's 2BT. 2BT. Yeah. It's a typo. Alright, so in multi-arm bandit, they basically directly bound this ratio somehow. And like most of the literature utilize the simple update form that we have of this OMP, this multiplicative weight update that I showed you before, whenever we optimize over the simplex. But now we don't optimize over the simplex. And the update form has a more implicit form. Okay, so yeah, it's not a closed form formula, so we can't really utilize the shape. So Zimmer and Zandin use a somewhat more general technique, but they still utilize a unique property of OMD and FDR on the simplex, and that is if I choose action A. So recall that the importance sampling estimator would be non-zero in the chosen action and 0 in all other inserts, right? So at least intuitively, I would reduce the probability to take action A and increase the probability to take any other action. Okay? So they use this property somehow, but this doesn't hold anymore for MDPs, for occupancy measure. Because now we have correlation between different inserts. If I reduce the probability to visit some state, it might reduce the probability to visit some other state. Okay? So this property doesn't hold, so we can't really use it. Alright, so our main idea is to tweak the estimator. So we would not use the standard importance sampling estimator, which reweight the cost using QT. We'll reweight using both QT plus D and QT. And specifically, so QT basically would allow us to keep the bias small, and QT plus D would allow us to control the stability. Yeah. Okay, so specifically, we reweight using the maximum between the two. Right? So now, as you can note, this estimator is now biased. It's not like the standard importance sampling estimator. It is now biased, but we can show that the bias approximately behaves like the drift term, right? Which we need to handle anyhow. So we don't really lose anything from that. All right. So for unknown dynamics, we can't really compute the exact occupancy measures. We use an upper confidence bound on this occupancy measure. So this is again a standard technique for handling important sampling estimator with unknown dynamics. And in order to get to obtain a high probability regret bounds, we add a small bias of order 1 over square root t. Okay, so recall from before, we have the drift and the stability. Now we use a biased estimator, so we also have a bias term which behaves similar to the drift. Right? So basically I need to bound the drift and the stability. And now, unlike before, stability is much more easy to handle because now this ratio is simply bounded by 1. Okay? I don't really need to bound this qt plus d divided by qt because I already have here qt plus d. Okay? So I bound this ratio by 1, and then I use some concentration bound. Here it also should be t, sorry. So I use some concentration bound on these loss estimators, which has a lower expectation than the true loss. And that way I can bound the stability term by, or this sum by HSAT. Okay? For the drift term, so this is the drift term again. Again, I use some kind of concentration bound on C around the actual losses. Then I take the L1 norm here, use Pinsker inequalities with a lot of technical things. And basically I bound the drift term by this sum of KL divergences. And then I utilize the OMD update, which has KL as regularization, to bound this KL between two consecutive occupancy measures. Right? So that way I can bound this the drift term as follow. And if I optimize over eta, I obtain the regret bound that I showed you before. Right. So here's a little bit on possible future work. So the main suboptimality gap that we have is again this HSA to the power 4th. Again, there is a suboptimality gap in this term that needs to be handled first in the non-delayed case. There is a recent work that consider a different framework of follow the perturb leader that also consider delayed feedback in MDPs. They have slightly worse bound than this one, and the regret guarantee is only in expectation and not the high probability like we do. Now, the main question that I think that is still open and I think it's interesting is whether we can achieve the optimal regret bound using the policy optimization algorithm. So as noted before, policy optimization is more efficient than this running OMD on the set of occupancy measures, and is again widely used in practice. So this is really what we want to see if it's optimal under delayed feedback. Right now we have suboptimal bounds for these kind of algorithms. So this algorithm was introduced by Kai et al. And Shani et al. So these bounds were suboptimal for the non-delayed case. Only recently, Lo et al. Showed optimal bounds for the non-delayed case, and we showed suboptimal bounds for the delayed case with policy optimization. So there's a still gap, important gap. All right, how do we do on time?
15 minutes.
15 minutes? Okay. Oh, okay. All right, so let's talk a bit about the cooperation in MDPs. Sorry, any questions about the delay part? All right. So again, we consider regret minimization in RL. So whenever you have a single agent, you have an agent that interacts with the environment, unknown environment. The cost can be either stochastic or adversarial. The end of each episode, the agent observes the feedback. So far, pretty standard. In cooperation, we have multiple agents that return the same environment and share the information with each other in order to improve the performance. Yeah, so some applications could be communication networks, traffic routing, if you think of Waze or something like that. So we all try to learn the same traffic, and we share information with each other through Waze in order to suffer less traffic. Robotics and so on. So we differentiate between two models of cooperation. So the first model is called flash randomness. In this model, we have duplicates of the same environment. So we have multiple agents. Each would have a different environment, but they are the same. Like have the same state transition and the same cost distribution. Right. So the transition, the net state are randomized independently for each of these environments.
And also the actions of any agent do not affect any environments of the other agents.
Yeah. So we will always consider that they don't affect each other, right? So this is the assumption, but each agent affects its own people, right? The goal is to utilize the shared information. We put aside strategic aspects and stuff.
It's only, but also it won't affect the state in a way that. So if they both, if it's not this case, but several agents are in the same world, so not the state transition. There's one shared state, so any agent's action might affect everyone else indirectly by changing the state. So in all of
it's not. So
maybe
let me show what is the other model. So this is called non-flash randomness. So in some sense, they are on the same MDP, but again, each agent affects its own state in action. But the thing is that agents that take the same action in the same state observe the same cost and transition to the same next state. Right? So basically, if you think about it, if we are all in a specific road, we would all suffer the same cost. Okay, so this is what I mean.
But in both of those models, agents that take actions, those actions do not affect.
They do not affect each other. Yeah, so it's not. If you're familiar with other regimes in the literature, it's not Markov games. Has no strategic aspects here. It's simply we want to see how they help each other. Okay, how the shared information help each other. Okay. So again, in this model, all the agents that are in the same state and take the same action observe the same cost and transition to the same next state. And in the context of learning, this model is much more challenging. Because here we observe much less feedback, right? If I have 50 drivers that are in the same road, they will all tell me that there's traffic in this road, and it doesn't matter if I hear it from one driver or 50 drivers, it's the same. Here, if they are on the same state, I still get 50 fresh samples from this cost or transition distribution, right? So, in terms of previous work considered only this model in the stochastic model. We consider also this model and consider adversarial losses in both of these cases. Okay. So here's some related work. So basically, in the single agent stochastic and adversarial MDPs, the optimal regret basically looks like, again, a square root of HT, much like in the multi-arm bandit, and we have some dependency in S and H. Right? So this would be the most general model: unknown transition, bandit feedback, adversarial rule. And if we have no transition and full information, this would be the bound. Right? The bound does not depend on the number of states and actions. All right. So adversarial multi-arm bandit is a special case here, where S and H equal to 1, in which case Bianchi et al. Consider cooperation model, and here they show that the regret basically interpolates between these two bounds. Right? So whenever you have a single agent, the regret mainly scales as the square root of the number of action times the time steps. And if the number of agents is more than the number of actions, so we obtain the optimal bound as in the full info case, even though each agent has bandit fit.
This means that each agent has this regret.
Yeah. So it's a regret quantity for each agent individually. Alright, so again, in RL, this model of cooperation was only considered in the stochastic case. So this is the adversarial multi-arm bandit. In RL, it was considered only in the stochastic case with flash randomness. Okay, so I have like 10 minutes, 5 minutes? Okay. Yeah, so again, we are the first to consider the flash randomness model, and we are the first to consider adversarial cost in cooperative online learning in MDPs. And we basically analyze all the settings, non-flash, flash, non-transition, unknown transition, stochastic, adversarial, and give lower bound and upper bounds for each of these settings. Alright, so let me skip the exact model, and let's go directly to the summary of the results. Alright, so here's the summary of the results. So like the first 3 rows here consider flash randomness model. So as you can see, if we have flash randomness model, either stochastic cost or adversarial cost, here is unknown transition, here is known transition, we obtain the optimal bound. Okay, so there's no gap between the lower bound and the upper bound. Whenever we have adversarial cost and unknown transition, so we have again an extra factor of ages on this second term, square root of ages, but again this is an open question even for single agent. And now, much like in the adversarial multi-arm bandit case, our regret basically interpolates between the optimal bandit regret and the full info regret bound. Right? So whenever the number of agents is 1, we have only a single agent. So we have the regret of the regret guarantee of a single agent. Whenever the number of agents is more than SA, more than the number of states and actions, so even though each agent has bandit feedback, we observe regret bounds like full information. Alright? And yeah, similar phenomena happens for both the non-transition and unknown transition. Alright, with non-fresh randomness, as I mentioned before, non-fresh randomness is more challenging, because if I have multiple agents that are in the same state and action, basically induce me the same feedback as a single agent. So here we have some limits, right? So regardless of the number of agents, okay, so let's look at the old one. Regardless of the number of agents, if the number of agents is huge, I still have regret that depends on the number of states. Alright? Unlike the fresh randomness case. Alright? Right, and the main gap we have here is exactly what is the dependency in the number of agents. Right? So here I have the dependency of square root of m, and here is like dependency of n to the power of 4. So with non-fresh randomness, so this was the stochastic case. With non-fresh randomness, adversarial losses, and known P, we obtain the optimal bound. Still, we have a limit here on what is the achievable regret. And the main question that remains with non-fresh randomness and adversarial losses is in the unknown dynamics case, in which case we have an algorithm which achieve approximately this limit up to this factor of square root of s, but only if I have many agents, like something like square root 2 number of agents, where in the other settings I only need something like A agents or S agents in order to achieve this limit. Right? Yeah. Okay, so thank you. And if there are any questions.
Not so important question, but what was the input to the DALI picture at the beginning? Multi-arm bandits?
Yeah,
Is that the text?
Yeah, it's a text. I tried to describe. There's like a classic image of multi-arm bandit of this octopus. So I tried to describe that. Let's see that again. Yeah. So I described an octopus playing slot machines, and then gave me like an evil octopus. Looks like really nasty. So I wrote it explicitly. I wrote nice octopus playing multiple slot machines, and this is the result.
So we want to thank again.